Beautiful. And I'm in Tucson, Arizona, the sunniest place on earth, as we call it. No. And we already have some questions rolling in. Will we send the presentation and recording via email? We will definitely be sending the recording via email to anyone attending right now. And the slides, reach out to me and we'll get them to you. All right, well, my name is Audrey. Let's kick things off. You can chat with me like this person did anytime during the webinar in the question box, and we will be answering all the questions that we can toward the end of the webinar, but send them in at any time. Our webinar today is presented by LitheSpeed and Scaled Agile. LitheSpeed experts help organizations drive business agility through strategic consulting, team coaching, and enterprise training. We have helped shape management strategy for 2 decades, and we've helped leaders from various industries implement lean portfolio management like we'll be talking about today, including with SAFe and Scaled Agile. And so from LitheSpeed, we have Roland Cuellar. He is our SVP of Business Agility, and he first published on the Lean Agile PMO back in 2006. Hi, Roland.
Hey, Audrey, how are you?
Good. And then we are joined today by Luke Hohmann from Scaled Agile. Scaled Agile is the provider of SAFe, the Scaled Agile Framework for Enterprise Agility, and Luke is a principal consultant at Scaled Agile. Luke,
hi.
As I understand, you helped develop Scaled Agile's LPM course and more.
Yes, I'm the steward for the LPM and the Agile product delivery competencies. So I get to help inform the LPM, the AEPM, and the POPM courseware, which is a great fun. I'm also the product owner for the Weave platform, which provides for things like participatory budgeting at scale, which is part of LPM.
Wonderful. All right, and let's do an audio check. We have a couple of people who can't hear anything. If you can hear something, send me something in the question box just to verify that we're not only talking with ourselves. We'll give that a minute. Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Joanne. You can hear. All right, and so again, questions in the question box, and you will be earning 1 PMI PDU or 1 Scrum Alliance SEU if you stick around with us for the hour. So let's kick it off. Here's our agenda for the day.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. These are some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. LPM is a huge topic. We don't have nearly enough time to get into depth on a lot of things. We're going to try and cover a few items in some depth today. I highly encourage you, if you haven't already, to look at the SAFe website and read more about the lean portfolio management. These are some of the things we're going to talk about today: budgeting and guardrails, portfolio flow, operations, and governance. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. Time and time again, we hear from our customers that the funding model, team structures, and governance requirements, et cetera, are really not set up to support SAFe. And of course, they aren't. They're designed to support the status quo. And in fact, they're designed usually to even enforce the status quo. And so to really enable Scaled Agile to flourish, we just absolutely have to address portfolio management. It's probably one of the most impactful elements of SAFe. Moving on. I don't want to go through all of the things in this table, but I'll just pick out a few just to let you know about really how impactful some of these changes are. You know, the transition from a projectized organization to a value stream organization is absolutely huge. It's a big mental shift, a real change in mental models that is quite impactful. Moving from big detailed requirements and big annual planning to really a dynamic flow of MVPs is another thing that is just a real change for how we manage and even how we think about portfolio management. And moving our focus from maximizing project WIP and utilization to maximizing delivery is something that most organizations are not used to. Everything is usually set up to support large infrequent deliveries, and we're trying to do just the opposite and have a lot of small frequent deliveries. It's just a completely different game. All of these things are pretty impactful changes. They require big changes in how we think about the problem, and big changes in how we manage the work. Moving on. I think that SAFE deals with these things really rather elegantly, and I think there are four maybe critical parts of it. The first is in changing what we manage and moving away from managing projects and starting to manage the flow of value through value streams. And that's a big topic in and of itself. Value streams, you get a lot of questions about value streams. I highly encourage you to read more about it. And of course, the SAFE LPM training does a good job of explaining where value streams come from and how we might design them. So this is one of the critical elements, certainly, is moving to value stream management. And the next is changing how we manage these value streams. And there are really three elements of it. We're going to talk about some of these today. The first, at the top of the pyramid, investment funding, and tying that more closely and more dynamically to strategy. Changing the portfolio operations and what it is that we're doing as a PMO or an LPM from day to day and week to week to help manage the flow of delivery. And number three is the governance aspect of it, which is a critical factor. We're going to focus on a few of these items today. And the first one is establishing lean budgets and guardrails. That's part of the strategy and investment funding piece. The first thing, as we mentioned, is getting away from really governing projects to governing long-lived value streams instead. But if we aren't going to govern projects, what are we going to govern and how are we going to govern them? And SAFE suggests that we set up really four guardrails to help with this. Those four guardrails are on the next slide. Setting up some investment horizons, performing capacity allocation, approving significant initiatives, and having or getting continuous business owner engagement. And what I want to do is turn this over now to our esteemed guest from SAFE, Luke Hohmann, to talk about some of these issues. Luke.
Oh, thanks, Roland. So let's keep going and talk about, in the process of establishing portfolio flow, next slide, what we might want to look at. And so the first is this notion of in a less agile world, we often find that we don't know who to submit our ideas to, and we have great ideas across the company. And in a more agile world and in SAFE, we have a specific mechanism for managing demand intake. And one of the things that Roland mentioned right at the beginning of this was that there's this notion of we want to get new ideas from our employees. And in SAFE, we actually introduced a new term called the innovation riptide. And if you think about the way the ocean works, the ocean is got this constant wave of energy coming in to the shore, and underneath there's a current called a riptide that pulls things back into the ocean. And SAFE actually has the similar kind of structure. The portfolio team is trying to decentralize control and funding into the value streams, because the value streams are the people who are most equipped to make local decisions and do what Roland said about managing flow. But in the process of working on a product, we create new ideas, and those new ideas could be discontinuous. That riptide is what goes back into the demand mechanism, and we use Kanban systems throughout SAFE, including at the portfolio level. So unlike traditional portfolio management, which has an uncertain and often unknown mechanism for managing intake, in SAFE we have a specific mechanism, a funnel in the Kanban system that receives that. Next slide. Now that portfolio system, if we look at the rest of the columns, if you will, or the rest of the states of a portfolio Kanban, you can see that that funnel says all the big ideas are welcome here. And that really empowers the teams, because we're doing two things. We're decentralizing and funding value streams, which gives them the confidence to at times think big, and we're creating a process by which that funnel captures those big ideas. Then we go through the new ideas. You know, Roland, one of the things that I like to say to customers that I've worked with is most traditional organizations approach portfolio management from a mental model of scarcity, and they walk around saying, oh, we don't have enough resources. We don't have enough resources. I actually argue that it's not scarcity, it's abundance. Most organizations have an abundance of fantastic ideas from their employees. And the trick of portfolio management in the review and the analyzing stage is to take that set of ideas and really find the exceptional ones. So for me, it's never a process of saying, I don't have enough resources. It's instead saying, we've got an abundance of opportunity for our company. How do we pick that process? And this is where in SAFE we have epics and we have reviews and we have analyzing, not because we want to be introducing some notion of control that's inappropriate or waterfall thinking that's not appropriate, but instead to capture that opportunity that exists. Now, Roland, when you kicked us off, you said something that was very subtle that I would like to highlight for the listeners. When you said MVP, if you recall, you didn't say MVP singular, you said MVPs plural. I think that's a really important insight that you had. And I want to point out that in the Safe Lean startup cycle, when the epic is funded by the portfolio team, we're not funding a single epic. We're funding an investment in experimentation. We're funding an investment in proving or disproving a hypothesis about how we believe we can best serve our market. That funding is intended to create the opportunity for the value stream to take and try out many experiments, not a single experiment. So Roland, I'm really glad that you picked up on that. And I was wondering if you might talk about some of the ways that you've seen your clients use multiple MVPs in a startup cycle as opposed to a single MVP.
Absolutely. Now, this is a great point, Luke. I like to think, back in finance, a portfolio isn't one stock. It's an investment in a bunch of stocks, a bundle of stocks or a basket of stocks that all need to work together. Some may be low risk, low payout, kind of easy money, if you will. Others may be riskier and further out into the future, and we need to think about all these things and have a healthy mix of all of the above. And so, absolutely right on in bringing up this notion of having multiple options with the MVPs. Any meaningful transformation that we do is going to have to deal with changing the unit of focus from big projects down to MVPs, MMPs, feature sets, capabilities, something smaller. And so we're going to have to break big chunks of work down and get them moving towards production so that we can test these MVPs, test these ideas, test these hypotheses, and test the market to see whether we're getting the business results that we want, commensurate with the amount of money and time we're spending on them. And so just like any Agile team will use a big visible radiator to track the stories that are flowing through the Scrum team, if you will, we really like to set up the big visuals for the flow of these MVPs, all the way from being ideas and desires and needs, which Luke mentioned, and there are, as he so rightly pointed out, an abundance of them. There's so many things that we could do, need to do, should do. How do we down select? How do we keep from saying yes to all of them now and choose the most impactful ones that we want to push forward at this moment? Then that needs to line up with our strategy and our goals for the quarter, et cetera. And so we find that really the best way to manage this is to make it visible. We are very visible creatures, and we want massive visibility into this flow of work, preferably in a place where everyone can see it. So we like to set up a big portfolio Kanban board that really shows the full process from ideas all the way through to delivery. And it can show and it helps to educate people as to what the process is, because we are changing the process. It helps to see the flow of work. It helps to see things not flowing. And it all, from a governance standpoint, it helps to somewhat enforce the process a little bit too, or enforce that we're trying to change things. And so it could show the work intake process, MVP formation, using weighted shortest job first to down select from all of the many ideas that we have, making sure that the MVPs that are selected are being appropriately groomed and getting turned into features, and our features are ready to go into the next PI planning event. All of these things help to educate and put some process discipline, not only on the IT side, but on the business side as well, as to how work comes in and when it comes in, and what product ownership needs to do to get work ready for the teams.
Yeah, I like
one of the things,
a big, radiator, because there's a statement in this picture about the hypothesis being proven, and it says yes. And one of the questions that we've had in the prior versions of SafeWell, when is a epic removed from the portfolio Kanban? And it's kind of a tricky answer. And it's in a sense a non-answer answer. And you'll see there it says the epic state is in the persevere, but it says, or when the portfolio governance is no longer required, we move the epic to done. And so the question becomes, well, when would the portfolio decide that the governance is no longer required? And the answer is, and I'm going to sound like a consultant, Roland, so you'll laugh. It depends, right? And it depends on having a proper structure of a functioning portfolio. Agile is always about collaboration, right? We believe in collaboration internally with our customers. It's part of the values of the Agile Manifesto. And so when we say that the portfolio team moves the epic into the done state, I love the idea of your big radiator, because it's a ceremony that you can celebrate. Hey, look, this epic was successful. We're really happy. We're moving it into the done state. And transfer of control moves into the value stream at the program level, and the program Kanban kicks off and takes it over. So it's no longer a portfolio concern. So I love this idea of having that big radiator, because it allows you to celebrate all of these state changes in a way that's public.
Yep, absolutely. One of the questions that comes up, Luke, in this is like, who does this work, all of this managing this flow of work and the portfolio and all of that. And from an org standpoint, one of the things we've been championing with some of our customers has been really transitioning a traditional PMO organization into what we call a VMO, or a value management office. And we're working with customers over the past few years on making this shift. And in the VMO, leaders are managing flow, prioritizing value, testing hypotheses, and seeing it through and trying to measure business results. And this VMO thing really supports SAFE's lean portfolio management very well. It becomes sort of the internal management structure by which we implement SAFE LPM and kind of drive that flow. Folks do have to figure out, like, who's going to do this stuff.
Well, I think that's a novel idea. If I put my Scaled Agile member of the framework team hat on, I would say that technically SAFE doesn't prescribe a VMO, but if I put on my SAFE in practice hat, right, one of the things that we like about SAFE is that the framework evolves. SAFE 5 is got more sophistication and is better aligned to the needs of business agility than SAFE 4.6, and 4.6 was better than 4. And so what I like to hear is this notion of how people in the real world are adapting and applying SAFE. And you're right, it's about the management of flow and the flow of value. What I would say is that in general, this is one of those things that for our listeners, you have to kind of approach portfolio management in a manner that is appropriate for the size and scope of your organization. And, when I was the CEO of Contenio, we did have a portfolio function because any company has one, but I didn't have, dedicated employees. I was a smaller company. So, I would get together with my leadership team and we would monthly review our stuff. And the leadership team of the company was in fact the de facto lean portfolio team. Larger organizations, and I'm sure some of the people that you consult with on strategy, they probably, and I'm asking because I'm wondering, but I would suspect that, if you're a multi-billion-dollar company, you might have dedicated full-time people in that value management office, because the complexity of managing flow, of looking at suppliers, of organizing and aligning your solution and your release trains, it might need a full-time job. Have you seen actual full-time jobs in the VMO, or is it a role that people play?
I think it's more common to be a role, but that there are people who spend significant amounts of time on it. People in finance and people who have to manage money and investment and that kind of thing will spend significant amounts of time on portfolio management. They still have other jobs, like in whatever their role dictates, like accounting and finance and whatnot. But the way that they sort of implement a lot of the work that they need to do is through the portfolio office or the value management office. That becomes sort of the forum by which they collaborate, as you so rightly mentioned earlier, that this portfolio management, like a lot of elements in SAFE, really is a collaborative effort. And so putting together some structure around how are we going to collaborate and who's going to collaborate and when are we going to collaborate becomes this sort of VMO office, if you will. And there are people who spend a lot of time in it and people who are spend less time in it.
Well, and I'll leave the listeners with this, and Audrey will probably move to the next slide, because I'm sure Roland and I are both so excited about the proper use of MVPs, and we want to talk about that. But I'll leave you with this, Roland. It's one of those things where I think people can get wrapped up on, should I have a full-time job or not? And my response is, well, it depends on how big the decisions you're making, right? If you're a smaller company and the decision is maybe not strategic, then maybe having a person spend a requisite amount of time on it is fine. But if you're a bigger company, or if you're doing cyber physical systems and you're talking about moving to, say, a new hardware platform or a significant supplier, like you're using a chip from one supplier and you're thinking about changing to a chip from a different supplier or a motherboard, you may want to have a person at the portfolio or the value management office spend significant time in reasoning about the impact of that, because it's going to affect your business, it's going to affect your architectural runway. And SAFE talks about this, right? We want to decentralize as many decisions as we can, but for those infrequent, truly strategic, truly impactful decisions, we do want to have, the care of the lean business case, put some thought into it, if you will.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's a good segue too into how the portfolio works, really, sort of this operations piece of it. Let's go ahead and get into that a little bit. Getting alignment and synchronization and execution and decentralization across the value streams and functions is pretty a big deal. And so SAFE recommends that we do these three things here. Coordinate across value streams. We're going to obviously try to push as much decision making into the value streams as possible to decentralize. But impactful work, larger pieces of work, bigger epics will often touch multiple value streams, and so we need some coordination there. Supporting program execution, just in helping folks get through all the internal hurdles and whatnot around delivery and moving work forward, and just driving operational excellence with you, if you will. Go ahead and move on. This coordination of value streams has to do with things like the timing of work intake, the timing of integration across value streams, the timing of release activities. Having a synchronization and cadence to the organization is a central sort of foundational element of SAFE, and it applies at this level as well. On the next page, this operational excellence is really supported well by SAFE's notion of a LACE, or Lean Agile Center of Excellence. They help to drive a common understanding, common practices, provide coaching and training, help in design and set up and launch new value streams and arts, and are generally internal SAFE, subject matter experts, sort of your internal consultants to help you manage all of this. The LACE is a critical function. And then the third element is supporting program execution, by assisting with the discovery and dissemination.
Roland, we in Scaled Agile, like formally, we talk about the Agile Portfolio Management Office, which is kind of the evolution of the PMO. Is my mental model correct in saying when you suggested that there's a VMO, if you were king, would you replace APMO with VMO?
I think it may be just a matter of notion, because we've been working with this VMO idea for a while now, and so. But I think the ideas are certainly similar. The Agile PMO is a function, if you will, of trying to get work flowing in this Agile kind of way. The VMO is another sort of way of thinking about really a rebranding, if you will, of just thinking about what it is that we are really focusing on. We want to focus on managing the flow and delivery of value, and we're just trying to make that front and center.
Yeah, but by the way, I didn't mean that critically. I just was thinking in my mind, my mental model has been PMO to APMO and the virtues there, and I'm wondering if you're kind of challenging me, which I like, to say, hey, wait, maybe the next evolution from the APMO is the VMO.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're going with it, is to really just thinking about what is it that we really want to drive, what is it that's really important, and where do we want to put our focus. And by calling it the VMO, we're trying to really highlight that is that delivery of, early and frequent delivery of value that is king, and that's what we want to organize around, and we're even going to call ourselves that.
I like it.
All right. So Luke, I wanted to turn this over now to you to talk about the governance aspect of things, and some of the great work that you've been doing in that area over many years now.
Well, let's start by talking about governance. One of the misconceptions about Agile is it's kind of a wild, wild west, right? Where, the Agile teams get to do what they want. And you're like, no, not really. When I teach this, I always tell people humans have lived in cities of more than 1 million people for more than 5,000 years. And in every successful city, we learned to do a couple of things. We learned to collaborate, but we also learned how to create structures that were appropriate for that period of time. And those structures included governance. How wide is the road? How do I connect into the sewage system? How do I get power to my city? How many volts or amps and things like that? What are the structures that by building codes, building materials, what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate, what have we learned? And I think that governance, we start by saying lean governance is a collaboration, but it's also governance. And there is a function that's undeniable about any portfolio about managing these budgets and forecasting costs. If I'm, Roland, if I'm going to build let's say I'm in the middle of, I'm an insurance company and I've got an internal claims processing system, and I need to make some substantial updates to both enable new business capability, but also deal with emerging privacy regulations in California and of course the rest of the world. That might be, in fact, a 2-year project. And I know I said project, and we're not thinking projects safe, but it might be a 2-year epic. It might be a 2-year endeavor. And I'm gonna, by the way, SAFE never said that projects are bad per se. We said project funding is not what we want. So you can think of things at times in a sense as a project. We just don't fund them that way. We fund them and execute them through value streams and epics. But nonetheless, right, I do have to have a forecasting function. I do have to have a mechanism to say, well, kind of how many teams am I needing? Is it, is it 1 art or 3 arts to get this work done? And how do I manage that? So the lean governance is the function in lean portfolio management that helps us make sure that we really are aligning our strategy to our execution and implementing accordingly. Next slide. Now, I think one of the more important elements of this is that we change the sampling frequency of budgeting. And what I mean by sampling frequency is it's hard to be agile when you do big upfront planning. And I've seen when I ran my own firm, I actually ran my company long enough to see very predictable patterns. I would get a lot of business in September and October as people would get ready for their annual budget near the end of the year. And then I would get even more business in February. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on. But what was happening is in September and October, people were hiring consultants to help them prepare for the annual budget battle. And it was actually sometimes called the battle. And then in February, once the dust had settled, people were actually trying to figure out, well, now that I have my budget and I'm back from, my holiday, how do I really allocate it? How do I really spend it? Completely inefficient, completely non-collaborative. The fact that someone would say it's a budget battle, it kind of implies that it's not a collaboration. So in SAFE, we're just going to completely and radically change that. We're going to first institutionalize the idea that we're going to have a rolling wave planning and budgeting so that we can really leverage business agility. We can really say, hey, when the business needs are changing, and we're dealing with changes right now, right? Everyone in the world is dealing with business changes because of the coronavirus. Now, we may not exactly know how coronavirus impacts our business. Some businesses may be even helped. Some businesses may be harmed. We're just not sure. But the idea of having an annual budget plan that's inflexible in the wake of changes like the coronavirus just doesn't strike me as very agile. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create a process whereby on average every 6 months, possibly more frequently, we're going to do dynamic adjustments of those budgets. And we're going to bring the people together who are part of this, the APMO, the business owners, the VMO, and we're going to have a conversation as a team about where we are and where we want to go. Next slide. Now, the way that we're going to do this, it's not just WSGIF that's involved. We're also going to apply participatory budgeting. Now, the simplest way to think about participatory budgeting is a group of stakeholders work together to allocate a shared resource. Audrey, I'm going to rope you into this. Let's say that I asked you and Roland both if you like broccoli. And Audrey, do you like broccoli?
Love it.
Okay, Roland, do you like broccoli?
Yeah, it's okay.
It's okay. I don't like it. I don't like broccoli at all. Now, what's interesting is it doesn't actually matter tonight if our opinions about broccoli, because, Audrey's in Tucson and you're up in the Bay Area North and I'm in the South, right? So it doesn't matter. But if we were to eat dinner together at my house, now it matters. And it matters because we converted something that was not a shared resource into a shared resource. And when you have a shared resource, the opinions and beliefs and experiences of the other people matter to us. And so this photo is from some of my philanthropic work. I work with cities and school districts and schools where we assemble hundreds of children or hundreds of residents, both in person and online, to give feedback on the city budget. So this is a photo from San Jose City Hall, where we've got hundreds of residents organized in collaborative teams giving feedback through this process on the city budget. And through a decade of work in San Jose, we've helped San Jose go from $100 million in debt to a $6 million surplus. And this has become part of the annual budgeting process. And it is annual for a city. A city can't quite be as dynamic as a company. But these choices work together in participatory budgeting to help adjust budgets dynamically. So let's look at the next slide and look at a little bit more of the mechanics about how we can apply participatory budgeting. This is a pretty dense slide, so let me start by saying, as with all things in lean portfolio management, we start with the strategic themes. We want to align our work with the specific goals that we've outlined as a business. We're going to then look at the current value stream budgets on the far left, look at the potential epics, look at the portfolio epics, look at our roadmap, which is what has been created by our program and product managers and solution managers about where they want to go. We want to look at what we call the run the business and grow the business. Run the business is kind of your minimum overhead to be successul. Think of that as salaries and office space and computers and hardware. If you're, let's say you're Cisco, your run the business is going to be higher than say a company who does pure software, because Cisco is making chips and routers and gear. So there's an amount of money that you have to just run your business and then grow the business, right? What's the budget for grow the business? Then we're going to bring together a set of portfolio leaders. Again, it could be the VMO, it could be the VMO plus architects who represent an Epic. And they're going to sit down at a table and they're going to say, we have a certain amount of money. How are we going to allocate it? Now, let me give you a clear number. If you count the number of people in this slide, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Let's say that your portfolio budget was $40 million and you have 8 people. That means each person in that table gets $5 million to virtually spend. And if you look at the next slide, what you'll find is that we're going to run multiple forums. So that picture in San Jose where we had multiple tables, you're going to do the same thing in your business. You're going to have multiple in-person or online forums where each group of people is independently imagining that they are allocating that budget. What we're then going to do is we're going to look at the results across the teams. So Roland, I'll give you a concrete example to help make this more realistic. I was working with a company, PayU, in Europe, and PayU does payment processing. Imagine a room of 42 people organized into 6 tables, and each table went through this process. Then we aggregated the result. Now, if 6 out of 6 tables with no crosstalk independently agree that funding a certain Epic is important, you would say, yeah, the group is in alignment. And if none of the tables fund an Epic, you would say, well, that's a good idea, but it's not worth funding. That's the kind of outputs that we get. And that data is used by the lean portfolio management team to make their final choices about how to adjust the value stream budgets, how to adjust the allocation of our resources, which Epics have we agreed upon in the forecasted period. And then because we're agile, we recognize this isn't a one and done. This is for the next budgeting cycle. And once we get into this habit of using participatory budgeting, you actually find that people look forward to it because they have an opportunity to have a conversation about the future.
Absolutely. No, this is huge. This notion of finding more efficient ways and more participatory ways to allocate the budget is fascinating to me. I was talking to a portfolio leader at an absolutely huge, enormous organization. This lady controlled a significant amount of money. And I asked her, we were talking about portfolio management. I asked her, well, do you really need all of these detailed plans and estimates to figure out what your budget is going to be? Because I said, yeah, I have a feeling that you probably know what your budget is going to be for the next several years. You've got financial targets to hit. She said, yep, I know the numbers that we need to hit. And I know the numbers that I can spend on various things. I don't need any of all these detailed business cases and requirements and estimates to know what we're going to spend. They don't tell me what we're going to spend. I tell them what we're going to spend. And so then I asked her, well, why did they go through all of this stuff? And she said, oh, that's just their process that they've come up with for fighting over who's going to get the money, right? So everything that you're talking about is trying to get away from fighting over who's going to get the money by who can create the biggest business case with the most detailed requirements. So let's just sit down and come up with different ideas and see how it all shakes out. I love this idea.
Yeah, well, it's funny. If we go back to this notion of the lean business case, right? Again, people, I think well-intentioned people can get confused about implementation, right? They start to look at the lean business case as a proof point, and it's simply a hypothesis. It's simply saying, if we make this kind of investment, we expect to get this kind of return if things work out. Well, we don't know if we're going to get that return. It's a hypothesis. So we're going to make an investment. And so many people, I'll give everyone, and Roland, you can steal this too. I'll give everyone what I call the sweater investment model. Let's say that it's a little cold and you think to yourself, gosh, I got to get a sweater. I don't really have good sweaters. I'm in the market for a sweater. So you are predisposed to buy a sweater. because you want one, you have a need.
Yep.
So you're walking down the street and you walk by a shop window and you see a sweater that you like, visually. Well, right off the bat, you're going to look at the store and it's going to frame in your mind a certain amount of cost, which is an investment because it's about you. And so you're going to say, well, I'm kind of willing to spend this much on your sweater. And if you walk into the store and you turn over the price tag and it's 4 times what you're willing to spend, you're going to walk out if you're a normal person. And if it's within the price that you're willing to spend, now you've really got to make the choice. Is this what I want to spend my money on? And you might say yes. That's often how those experienced portfolio people are managing the process. They're like, look, I know the business cases are there, et cetera, whatever. I'm willing to make this kind of investment in my company. And I kind of am looking for those investment choices that are the best investment. So give me enough business case so that we can help make a good investment choice, but know that in reality, I'm not going to hold you to every dime that you've put into the business case. That's not the purpose of the business case.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, what's next on our slides? Yes, okay. Roland already talked about this. So Roland, I'm just gonna draft into what you said, this notion of this feeling of participation, this feeling of empowerment, this improvement of morale. We know that employees are disengaged, right? Read any Gallup survey. The less agile the organization, the more disengaged the employee. However, the more agile the organization, the more engaged the employee. And it's a very simple reason. We decentralize autonomy and control and all those things that Dan Pink taught us in Drive, right? We decentralize this notion of autonomy and mastery. So participatory budgeting is another manifestation of listening to people and getting them excited and getting them involved. Okay, now, there's a lot of metrics that people can use. Roland, SAFE provides a menu of metrics, right? From employee engagement and time to market or quality. What I always recommend people do is you think about this like literally, I used menu because if you go into a restaurant, they're going to give you a menu of appetizers, right? You don't use them all unless your meal is appetizers, right? You don't eat them all. You're going to look at that menu and you're going to say, well, what do I need right now, or what do I want right now? And I'd like to get your feedback on how do you help organizations understand which dimension might be more relevant for their needs at that time? Because my expectation is that sometimes those metrics are going to change.
Oh yes, I was about to say the very thing. I had the great pleasure and privilege of working with the CIO and the Department of Homeland Security and their Citizenship and Immigration Services function, Mark Schwartz, years ago. And he was a master at changing the metrics. And I really kind of learned this from him a while back, but it was the idea that our problems change and the issues we're dealing with at any particular moment in time change. And so our metrics should change. And so early on in your transformation, for example, you may pick a set of metrics that are really just going to get you to some basic delivery. Measuring business results is great, but I can't measure business results until I actually deliver stuff. So back in those days, working with him, we focused our early metrics on delivery, and that changed the behavior to get folks to deliver. Later, as we started to get more mature at delivery, then it's, are we delivering the right stuff? Are we getting the business results that we need? And started to then move the metrics to actually getting operational data, right? And those kind of things. Or sometimes we'd have quality issues or WIP issues or other kinds of team morale and turnover issues or whatever it happens to be. So he was a master, I think, at changing the metrics to focus on the problems of the day. Can't change them all the time, but they might change a couple of times, twice in a year potentially as we solve issues and the new ones pop up, because there will always be new issues.
I want to build on that, and I think maybe, Roland, our history in the Agile community gives us a perspective that maybe some of the newer people in the Agile community they might realize. But I was actually on the organizing committee of the first Agile conference in Salt Lake City in 2003. And, you know, we were thrilled. We had 170 people show up, and we're talking about this, you know, new thing, the Agile Manifesto, and all this crazy different way of working. And what I would remember, I can tell you for sure, in 2003, none of us were talking about, you know, the difference in subtlety between outcome and output metrics and vanity metrics. Like, you're laughing, but like, we weren't talking about that. We were like, dude, get your team to done, and you'll be making progress, right?
Exactly.
Remember those days?
Yes, absolutely.
And then we started to get better at it. We talked about, well, how do we start to measure how we're doing? You know, well, okay, well, let's do estimates. Well, how do we do estimates in a more agile way? And thank goodness for Mike Cohn and some of the work that the Bain company did with Delphi and points-based estimates. And we said, okay, we've got points-based estimates. Let's start tracking velocity. And remember that we started to introduce that in the Agile community. And then people said,
burn down charts and all that.
Yeah, burn down charts. And then people said, wait, that's an output metric. It's not an outcome metric. And we're like, oh, okay, back to the drawing board. What are outcome metrics? And it's these kinds of things, right? Net promoter score, or you know, how are we doing relative to you know, defect data? And then we looked at things like you know, leading and lagging indicators and stuff like that. So what I would, the reason I'm bringing this up is the Agile community has matured over the last, you know, roughly 20 years, quite a bit. And I liked what you said about, you know, this notion of changing metrics. And I also let people know, you don't have to start with a perfect implementation of metrics to get value. If you're not measuring anything, you know, good grief, start measuring something.
Agreed. Yep, I remember one time having a big issue, I think, in one of our clients around, there's just way too much WIP across the board, portfolio WIP, too many simultaneous projects going on. And then within the teams, too many simultaneous stories. Just, you know, everything was just totally packed, and there's no room for anything to actually move forward. So you know, our CIO decided that, you know what, we're going to measure WIP, portfolio WIP and team WIP and WIP at different places. And just putting a measurement around it made it go down. Just the very fact that you're looking at it helped to start to change people's minds around it. And of course, once the WIP went down, stuff started to flow, right? So, you know, having a problem that you feel is out there, putting a measurement around it, and then seeing how that measurement starts to impact people's behavior. And then you move on to the next problem, because there will be another one, and you can put in a new metric around that.
Yeah, I totally like that idea of, you know, you know, of saying, hey, the problems that we're facing are changing. And frankly, you know, I've worked with one organization years ago that had an enormous technical debt. They had a backlog of bugs that the prior CIO, so a new CIO joined the company. When they got there, they cracked open the covers and they really found what was going on, which was no investment in technical debt reduction or bug fixing for a number of years. And they inherited quite a substantial problem. And so they did the right thing. They said, look, we're going to put, you know, a bug burn train together, and we're going to create, it's a small train, but nonetheless, it was an actual train. We're going to put 5 teams on bug burn, and we're just going to burn off bugs. And he said, we have roughly 1,700, you know, identified production bugs. And when that gets down to 1,000, we'll drop a team. When that gets down to 600, we'll drop a team. And so, of course, he created an incentive, because most developers don't like spending their entire time fixing a bug. They want to build new stuff, which is one of the virtues of built-in quality and safe, is the more you build in quality, the more you can, and I'll secretly tell you, Roland, when I am recruiting developers for the Weave platform at Scaled Agile, one of our recruiting advantages is we can tell them flat out, because we've built in quality, you'll spend almost all of your time building new features.
Yeah, that's
and
cool.
Developers are like, whoa, really? So I like this notion of, you know, we can pick and change our, because once he got his bugs under control, he no longer tracked them. because it was not a
Right.
relevant metric to track.
Exactly.
Audrey,
Beautiful.
you got any cool questions for us?
I sure do, yes. So we're hitting the final slide, and if you have a question to write in, go ahead and put that in the question box. So let's go back to this slide. And some are rolling in. So Luke and Roland, when does the work move from the portfolio backlog to the program backlog?
Luke, I'll let you take that one.
Well, we talked about that directly, right? And it's a collaboration. If you take the LPM course, you'll find that we've added guidance about the frequency in which the portfolio team should meet. And we're actually recommending, and it may seem like a lot, but it's actually, in my experience, in an Agile environment, monthly is a recommended frequency for the portfolio team to meet. And we actually in the course lay out an entire year of meetings, because sometimes you're meeting about the status of the projects, or sorry, the status of the epics in the portfolio, and sometimes you're meeting to do more strategic things. So in that monthly meeting, the and we call it the portfolio sync, like the PO sync or the Scrum,
sync.
yeah, the other syncs. But in that monthly sync meeting, the portfolio team should look at the status of every item in the portfolio. And that's when they decide, based on a conversation, like, this is no longer a portfolio concern, we're moving it off. It's funny, this is in my mind because I'm a member of the portfolio team at Scaled Agile. And we just had our meeting on Monday, our portfolio sync on Monday, and we in fact agreed as a portfolio team, this item's handled, we're moving it off the portfolio. It's no longer a portfolio concern, if you will.
And what I would add something else to that, and that might be that it may be on both. It may not move off of one and onto the other, but be on both at different levels of granularity. So it may be something that the portfolio team is still concerned about, and it's in development, or an initial delivery has been made into production, and we're waiting to see how that goes. And so it's on the portfolio board. But at a lower level of granularity, it's also on the program board, where it's being turned into lower level MVPs, features. Where are we in the PI? Is it ready for PI planning? Is it in development, et cetera? And so it could live on both boards at different levels of granularity at the same time.
All right, let's take another. What are your thoughts on using this framework, LPM, when the roadmap has to be presented and approved by the board before this?
Well, I would want this framework to be used for board level items, because it's the best way that the board has to manage the fiduciary structure and control that the board is responsible for, right? The board is going to set the highest level of strategy of the company, and the board has, if you're truly talking about the board of management of a company, they have a legal responsibility to help the company make investment choices. So the board typically is going to work at the level of strategic themes, and they're going to look at those investments that the portfolio is making, and they're going to look at other measures. Now, I would say that an area that I find in practice where people at that level are working is you'll often find more financially minded individuals. And what I mean by that is that SAFE puts a lot of emphasis on efficient execution. And that tends to be in the world of budgeting, but at the board level, you're switching terms into more of the domain of investing. So you might look at things like weighted cost of capital, or internal rate of return, or hurdles, or things like that. So this is where that value management office or that Agile PMO is often going to have an actual financially minded person to help translate the way we think in terms of Agile, which is trains and arts and PIs, into numbers and investments and returns that a board can manage.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything here that wouldn't fit into the notion of presenting to the board. We could set up OKRs, objectives and key results, that line up to our strategic goals. We could then go through the participatory budgeting process and come up with recommendations on how that money should be spent, or how we're going to achieve these things, and how the money shakes out, and then go back and present that to whoever it needs to be presented to, be it a board or whomever. So I think it can all work fine.
All right, now in a smaller company, we have a question. How do you implement portfolio value streams for smaller organizations when there is no dedicated portfolio manager?
I would see that as a cross-functional team effort, a collaborative effort from different functions, different parts of, even in your small company, you've probably got some financial folks, and you may have some IT leaders, and you may have some team leaders and some production and operation folks and whatnot. And they need to get together and get aligned on what are our goals? How can we best achieve those goals? What are some small, high impact, low cost MVPs or hypotheses or tests that we can run, that we can get out there and agree on it at that level? And I don't know that it necessarily needs to be have dedicated roles associated with it, but we probably do need something equivalent of a scrum master kind of thing to herd those cats and get the process running and keep it going.
And I would simply add to what Roland said is, it's a tricky thing for Roland and I to answer a question like that one, because that particular question is usually associated with additional data about organizational size and structure and their revenue and turnover that we don't have yet. But I would say in any sizable implementation of SAFe, there is a function of an additional thing that Roland mentioned, which is the LACE, right? The Lean Agile Center of Excellence. And so for the person who asked that question, I would also submit to them that they might want to consider the role of the LACE and how it's supporting this process and how it's helping contribute to the success of the portfolio function.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we can take 2 more questions, and if anyone has another question, you can stick it in. I'll try to get you an email at a later, or emailed answer at a later time. So looking at participatory budgeting, how many people do you recommend being involved for doing this the first time in an organization of 300 to 500 people? 6 Scrum teams, but many other departments have budget requests.
Well, I've been helping organizations implement participatory budgeting for almost 20 years now. And what I find is, and I'm going to quote a friend of mine who I think is a fantastic agilist. And Roland, I don't know if you know the name. Do you know the name Brad Appleton?
I've heard of Brad, but I can't say that I know him, unfortunately.
Yeah, he's a great guy in the Agile community. He's been around for a while. But Audrey, what Brad said one time in a post was, the first thing to build is trust. And I love that quote, because many times in an Agile adoption, we're going from a waterfall state or a less Agile state where, like, we missed our deadlines, or we missed our quality targets, or we missed something. And I've gone into organizations where they said, "Are you going to blow up our QA team?" And I'm like, "Nope." And they're like, "Why?" Because Agile says, you're supposed to build done at the every sprint. I said, because we haven't earned the trust yet to stop the QA function. And that once we build trust that our dev teams are hitting done, we can change how we do QA. So Audrey, I think the same principle applies to portfolio management and participatory budgeting. I would start with the phase 1 would be just take those people who are currently involved in the budgeting process and run a small non-binding session on participatory budgeting so they feel what it's like. They feel what it's like to have equal amounts of money that they collaborate on. That will then, if it goes well, and it usually does, open up the idea that maybe we can hear more voices. We're not saying that you're going to turn over the selection and funding of projects completely to the organization in one step. We are saying you can increase the utility of the decision by getting more voices involved. And I know we're out of time, but I'll simply say that that's how we build trust. So I would say in that organization, start with 1 PB session for the existing organization. And if it goes well, then use that to extend it into a feedback session, like internal market research, and then keep the process going.
All right, thank you so much. And if we didn't get to your question today, we'll try to get you an answer via email. Thank you everybody for joining us. And thanks so much, Luke and Roland, for presenting today.
Thank you, Audrey. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks again. If you need help implementing any concepts Roland and Luke talked about, reach out to LitheSpeed. We also host public and private Scaled Agile training, including the SAFe LPM class. And finally, if you're in the DC area, we have the Lean plus Agile DC conference coming up May 13th, and we'd love to see you there, leanagiledc.com. All right, everybody have a great day. Thanks again, Luke and Roland, and we'll see you around.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.